trying to set a paper set piece set up. Sounds like a so there.
Over to 20, close to 2,300. Got the guy fired. I mean, transfer.
One of the new ways now, whatever the newest one is.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Abington World War II lecture series. I just wanted to know if this is anyone's first time attending here. To raise your hand. Thank you. We've been here 10 years now. We're here the third Tuesday of each month. We have 2 programs, 3 p.m. program and a 7 p.m. program. So thank you for coming out. And before we get started, I just wanted to, the first announcement I wanted to make was we're in need of volunteers, mostly phone callers. So if anyone's interested in just making phone calls to potential speakers and to our attendees, just come see one of our volunteers at the end of the program. And before we get started, also we have a Veterans in the Classroom project. We speak to area high schools. We've spoken to Springfield High School, Abington High School, Upper Moreland, and Upper Dublin. Any other schools? Does that cover them all? Abington. Those are the schools we've been speaking at since 2003. We're in need of more veterans to speak to the high school students, and we're in need of some leadership for that project. So if you're interested in speaking to kids, just come after the lecture. Also, we're in need of more speakers to fill out our speaker roster. But we're trying to schedule up to a year in advance our speakers. And we need backup speakers. As you noticed, a lot of our speakers cancel last minute due to medical problems, like our speaker we were supposed to have today. So, and I'm going to hand it over to George Stiftinger now, who's going to lead you through the invocation and introduction and the Pledge of Allegiance. George.
Good afternoon. Before we have the invocation, why don't we rise for the pledge of the flag, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As Brian indicated, we have a substitute today, and we're fortunate to have with us Bob Clancy, who was in the Navy, commander, going to tell us about naval operations in World War II, and we're certainly appreciative on such short notice to come in. It does indicate we do need quite a bit of support. And Brandon has indicated we need Veterans in the Classroom, and Joe Campbell will be taking those calls. What I'm going to read today is a birthday prayer. I had a birthday just a few weeks ago. I was 84, and this was given to me by one of my friends that attended. I think it's somewhat unique here in that, generally speaking, we think of birthday prayers and wishes that we want something physical. And here we're talking about psychological and religious. Dear Lord, give me a few friends who understand me and yet remain my friends. A work to do which has real value, without which the world would feel the poor. A mind unafraid to travel, even though the trail be not blazed. An understanding heart, and yes, a sense of humor. Time for quiet, silent meditation. A feeling of the presence of God. And the patience to wait for the coming of these things with the wisdom to know them when they come. So if you'll bear with me, we're going to segue from the sublime to the ridiculous. I have a little story about birthday wishes by a child. She's been bugging her mother for days. She wanted a red bike, and her mother just kept putting her off. She decided to write a letter to the Lord, and she says, well, I haven't been a very good girl, so what am I going to do? What am I going to tell him that he doesn't already know? So she finally gives up and decides she'll go down to the church. Tells her mother she's going down to the church. This church that she went to has a small altar, primarily for children. She looks around, doesn't see anybody there, goes down to the altar, and takes a statue of the Blessed Mother, runs home, quickly goes up to her bedroom and starts her final letter. Dear Jesus, I have your mama. If you want to see her, you better send that red bike to me before the week's end. And she signs it, you know who. So you can see there are all types of variations about wishes for a birthday. So without further delay, please introduce Bob Clancy. Bob, the floor is yours.
Thank you, George. I don't know if you heard George, but he said something about Second World War for me. I'm afraid I'm a little bit beyond that. I was involved in the Navy during the late 50s, and I was going to be talking today about the Cold War. Just to put it in context, not only was the problem with Russia, of course, taking over most of Europe, in June of '50, North Korea invaded South Korea. Senator Joe McCarthy was having the witch hunts in Congress looking for communists in both the entertainment industry and the State Department until he was censured in 1954. In the summer of '52, I had just graduated from high school and was going to go to Penn State that fall. And they, of course, had sent out a lot of paperwork. And I mentioned to my dad, who had been in the First World War in the last month or so, that Penn State's a land-grant college. So all males going to school there for 2 years had to be in some ROTC program. They had Air Force, Navy, and Army. And I said to Dad, well, I guess I'll join the Army. And he said, like heck you will. I think he said heck. He said, like heck you will. He said, you join the Navy. They sit down at a table 3 times a day for the meal, and they sleep in their own bed every night. That got my start in my naval career. The first item I wanted to show you on the screen is a loyalty certificate. That's just one side of it. On the other side, placed aside, there's a total of 249 organizations listed there that the Attorney General had said had some communist affiliation. And you had to sign at the bottom that you were not ever in any one of those organizations. First time I read it, I thought I was going to find the Boy Scouts of America listed there. But there were only 2 things you could say in that box at the bottom. None, or none to my knowledge. Otherwise, you had to go talk to someone. But that's how strict they were regarding trying to weed out communists during that period of time. After 3 years at Penn State, I had changed majors a couple of times and really didn't know where I wanted to go, but the one thing I did like was the Navy program. So I dropped out of school after my 3rd year and joined the NAVCAT, Naval Aviation Cadet Program, down at Pensacola. You had at least 2 years of college, you could get into that. You go through ground school. When you're finished, after they've taught you to fly, you get your wings and a commission in the service. Pre-flight, Willow Grove. I came into the Navy at Willow Grove, got sworn in up there before they flew us down to Pensacola. And when we arrived, the chief there says, now look, you'll be going down this coming weekend, but you won't get paid until the last day of the month. And that's 3 weeks off. If you agree to be sworn in now, when you get paid at the end of the month, you're going to get 3 weeks pay. Everybody else is just going to get 2 weeks pay. And we thought, hey, that's a good idea. So when the officer came in, said, anybody want to be sworn in? We all stepped forward, took the oath, he congratulated us, walked out, and the chief said, okay, now you're mine for a week. Well, I found out what field day really meant. At the ground school was 4 months down in Pensacola, and there were a couple things that you never forget. First of all, the Marine drill instructors. If you ever had one, you'll never forget them. The other thing was the survival training. Back then, everything was piston-driven aircraft, and if it crashes in the sea, which we were known to fly around a lot, because of the heavy engine in front, the first thing it's going to do is flip over. So they had what they called the Dilbert Dunker. It was a framework of a cockpit at the swimming pool. You got strapped in, and then they released it. It would go down a track like a roller coaster, but when it hit the water, then it immediately turned upside down. And the instructor said, don't panic, wait, hold your breath, and then just look at the bubbles. You want to know which way is up? Bubbles always go up. After you're scared. But after you do it the first time, you want to do it again, they say, no, you only get one shot at it. Primary was out at Whiting Field, and when we got there, our class was divided in half. And they've introduced this aircraft, the T-34, for pilot training, and the other half of my class got sent to South Whiting, where they were still flying the S&J, a trainer that went back to the 30s. This was a real easy aircraft to learn how to fly. We learned in about 10 hops, and we soloed it. The S&J was a harder aircraft to learn to fly and maneuver. They took almost 20 hops before they would solo. After that, we went to Corey Field, where we flew the T-28. People might recognize these from over at Wings Field when they're on display. This was going to be the Navy's new trainer. It had an engine in it that was more powerful than anything they had during the Second World War. The only problem is, you see the tail hook on this one. The tail hook had a tendency to pull out, so they couldn't use it for carrier landing. And although there's no armament built into the aircraft, it had a pod that could hang under the wings that could fire a machine gun. And they kept having problems with that. So after doing instruments and night flying in this aircraft, we then had to transition to the next aircraft, which is the S&J. Some of you might recognize it. The Air Force called it the Texan, two-seater. But now knowing how to fly, this aircraft was a great plane to fly. You didn't have to worry about it to learn to fly. Then you flew this thing. We did gunnery and carrier quals in this, and then in November flew out to the USS Saipan to do our carrier quals. Every Navy, Marine, and Coast Guard pilot goes through flight training has to do 6 carrier landings before he gets out of pre-flight. And somebody was up in Vulture's Row, took the pictures of my landings on there, and you get the little card stamped, you've been there, you've done it, move on. Next thing was advanced training at the at the O Club in Kingsville, Texas. There, although we were still cadets, we could run a tab at the O Club. which was great. Drink all you want, but on payday, you better go in there and settle up. Then we were back in the T-28 that you'd seen before for instrument flying. Did a cross-country, we were supposed to go to San Diego on a cross-country instrument where I'm under the hood in the back and the instructor's up front to make sure we don't run into anything. We only got as far as El Paso, Texas. After flying all day from Kingsville, we hadn't even gotten out of the state of Texas. Sandstorm came and hit and topped out at about 32,000 feet. So we spent 4 days on the ground there in El Paso. Then finally, when it cleared, he said, we've been away long enough, turn around, and we came back. But after that, we then went to jet training. This is an Air Force model with a shooting star, maybe called it the TV-2, pilot and an instructor in the back seat. That was the first jet I flew. In March, the next thing, they speeded up the program, although we weren't quite finished yet, because the Air Force had done it. They wanted to match it. We got commission and our wings. One of the nice things was that night back at the Oak Club, I was buying champagne for everybody. They even gave them a bottle to take home. And I go back to the barracks and sound asleep. Next morning, Saturday morning, I'm still, and all of a sudden, the second lieutenant Marine, who was the barracks officer, because I'm in the second bunk, comes in and rattles the bunk and says, "What are you doing here?" And I told him, I live here, this is where I sleep. He said, "No, you don't. You're commissioned. This is for NAVCATs. Get up, get dressed, and get out to BOQ." The next item is one of my favorites, is a certificate commissioning me as a general in the Texas Air Force. Has successfully passed all the rigid requirements, is hereby commissioned general. He's entitled to the following privileges and honors: getting high as a kite, landing on a burlesque runway, bombing the Internal Revenue Office, flying off the handle, commanding anything that flies, including time, roamers, and rolling pins. After that, the next aircraft was the F-9, F-5 Panther, which is a straight-wing version of an aircraft I was to later fly. This was a beautiful aircraft. This was only a single seat. They don't have trainers in this, so you've gotten to the point, okay, we've shown you the cockpit, let's go. From there, I got orders to, after graduation, to go to VF-81 in Oceana Naval Air Station in Virginia. They were supposed to get this F-4D Skyray, which is an all-weather interceptor aircraft. So to prepare us for it, we were sent down to Key West, Florida, where we were flying for training. The next picture, the Douglas F-3D Sky Knight. The Marines flew this in Korea. It has one pilot and it has a radar operator in the seat on the side. The training down at Key West was we would take off day or night, but if it was daytime, you're covered. Most of our flights are at night. Ground radar would get us within so many miles of the target plane. Then once we picked it up on the screen, we then told the pilot, okay, let's come right, let's come left, we have to go up, we have to go down, bringing us in close enough where the pilot would say, okay, we're close enough, then break off. And that was our training to use radar for intercept. Now we get to Oceana, and we're flying the Cougar, which is a swept-wing version of the Panther. A lot faster, better armament, and the probe you see in the nose is for in-flight refueling, which we all had to get qualified in. As anybody that's been in the service as an officer knows, that to get advanced from ensign to JG and so on, there were a certain number of correspondence courses you had to take and complete. One of the hardest ones I'd heard about was naval justice. An opening came up for the squadron that could send one person up to Newport, Rhode Island for a 2-month course at the Naval Justice School, and that way you didn't have to take that exam. I signed up for it, and I thought it'd be a great way to have some per diem, save up to get my fiance a ring at Christmas. Well, while I'm up there, I finally found what I wanted to do. I fell in love with the law. Now all I had to do was finish my 4.5 years to get out and go back to law school if I could get in. After this aircraft, we now, for landing systems, as you know from pictures from the Second World War, they used the landing signal officer on the corner of the deck to bring the plane in. The British invented this. Basically, it's a huge mirror. It has lights on both sides we call datum lights. And down here where you can't see it is a light reflecting off the mirror that's at a 3-degree angle. So as you're approaching the carrier level, you're coming in, until you pick up that we call ball or meatball, you'll see it at the bottom of the mirror, and as you come in a little further, the light comes up. When it's in the center, you hold it there. You then fly it down. If the lights on top here are all red lights, if the landing signal officer doesn't like your approach, too fast, to this, to that, he just pulls the trigger gun he's got, those red lights start flashing, and over your earphones you hear wave off, wave off. But this made it so much safer for landings, for pilots. We found that, especially daytime, that this was a great system and it worked beautifully. As a matter of fact, it's interesting, the picture at the bottom shows another A4 Skyhawk. That's a plane our squadron eventually was flying. In February *58, since we were a day fighter squadron, we went down to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, for a couple weeks for air gunnery. And of course, we were over in what they call the leeward side, where the jet field was, across the bay from NAS Guantanamo. We get down there on a Friday. The O Club had happy hour. All drinks for 2 hours were 10 cents a drink. So we go over there waiting for happy hour. There was a Canadian anti-submarine squadron just finishing up their 2 weeks of training down there. The CO of that squadron comes in just as happy hour starts. He slaps a $20 bill down on the bar and he said, "I'm buying drinks for everybody." 2 hours later, he got change back. My wedding, yes, that I had saved up a lot of money for. First of all, it was supposed to be in June, but then the squadron got notified we were going on a cruise in the North Atlantic starting in June. So my to-be wife was able to get it, moved back about a month. We got a date for May. And I put in for 2 weeks of leave to have a honeymoon. And the weekend before I was to go on leave, the CO called me in. And he said, "You know those 2 weeks you have of leave?" He said, "You're going to have 2 days, Saturday and Sunday, and you're back here." He said, the admiral that was running the carrier group for that summer cruise decided he wanted every squadron night qualified on the carrier. We were day fighters. We don't fly at night. We're day fighters. So he said, starting that Monday, after the weekend I got married, we go to work at 5 in the evening and we work to 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning doing field carrier landing practice in the dark. Using the mirror system, they have a small field off to the west of Oceana, and we use that for practice. So for 2 weeks, every night, I'm out there flying. My wife's home sleeping. And then we finally head out on the cruise in the North Atlantic. Can I see the next one? Oh, we talked about in-flight refueling. This is a picture of an A4 with what we call the tanker package on here, where normally you could have bombs or an atomic bomb. And that would hold fuel, and he can control from inside where the pilot sits. He could let that hose ring out. It's got like a basket on the end. We had to plug into that. Once you get stuck in there, then he had a green light, he would transfer fuel. When you wanted to disconnect, you just pull back on the power and the plane would pull itself out. But that's what in-flight refueling looks like. So day fighters, we had to qualify above 20,000 feet. Next thing is, oh yes, USS Intrepid. A lot of you know it if you've been to New York. This carrier was commissioned in August of '43. It survived a torpedo and 5 kamikaze hits during World War II. It was reactivated in February of '52. Steam catapults that I'll mention in just a minute were added in '54. And the angled deck and the hurricane bow was added in '56. The angled deck is right here. First, Second World War carriers just had a straight deck. So they parked the planes up forward. If you missed the wire with your tail butt, there would be a barrier here that you'd run into. They'd rather lose you or your plane rather than have you hit the planes up ahead. When they come up, the British came up with this angled deck. Even though the ship's moving away from you, you're aiming for that deck. If you miss a wire and hit down, the procedure was always to go to 100% power. If your hook missed, it's just a touch and go. You go around. If you caught the wire, no problem. That wire, you'd be at 100%. That wire's going to hold you. You pull back the power, and they have you taxi over the side. So that was one of the greatest things for the Navy carriers. The other thing is what they call the hurricane bow. Second World War were basically just flat decks built on top of little cruiser hulls. They came up with this where they meld the bow right in to the flight deck, so it could take heavy storms without getting a lot of water underneath that deck. And again, was a good thing for the carriers. Next photo is, besides the type of aircraft we were flying, there were 2 squadrons of ours. There was a 3rd small photo squadron flying our type of airplane. There was also another squadron, it was McDonnell Demon, and the Douglas Sky Raider, which lasted all the way through, came out of the Korean War and spent a lot of time in the Vietnam War. Some of you may be familiar with the McDonnell Demon. When that aircraft was built for the Navy, the engine that they were supposed to use was underpowered. It was very dangerous to fly it. I remember as a kid seeing in the newspaper where the Navy didn't know what to do with these things, and they're out on a barge going down the Mississippi just to store them down south someplace until they got an engine. And somebody got an overhead photograph talking about the waste of the Navy's money. There goes the planes on a barge. The next one is, this North Atlantic cruise. This was nice. This was my honeymoon. From Norfolk to Lisbon, Portugal, up around to Oslo. But that transverse up there in the North Atlantic, people in the Second World War heard about trying to get ships up through there. In my bunk, the junior officer bunks were forward under the catapults in the carrier. We had a storm one night. I'm in the bunk, and I've got my 2 hands, laying flat on my stomach, my 2 hands holding the rails, my feet locked around the rails at the back. The carrier is going up. All of a sudden, the wave's down. It comes smashing down, and then shakes sideways. And up again, and it comes smashing down. I mean, normally, nothing disturbs a carrier compared to a destroyer as far as bad weather goes. But that was one heck of a night. Now I knew what they mean about those storms. After Oslo, we went down to Rotterdam, and the Brussels World's Fair was going on at that time, so we got a day trip over there to the fair, which was very nice. Next photo is, I think, the squadron. This is the squadron. The only person in that picture with his eyes closed, second from the left over there standing up. Guess who it is? Ned Schumann stayed in. He was a career officer. In Vietnam, he was shot down. Spent 5 years in POW camp. Bob Wyman's who shot down and killed in Vietnam. And 3 or 4 of the others, I don't remember which now, did survive Vietnam and went on to become captains in the Navy. The next photo is the, in those various foreign ports we went in. Before we got there, it was common for the admiral to have honored guests out aboard the ship. And we would put on a little air show for them. Here we are flying in the diamond formation. This aircraft was the greatest thing to fly for formation flying, because in here, all you did was line up on that wing, and you had a perfect position. I was flying tail slot there. I think you can see the heat from the jet. When you got back in the tail slot, you slowly came up until your rudder got in to that and started fluttering a little bit. Then you just back down a little bit, and then you knew you were in the right position. The next photo is showing the carrier, and you can see that disturbance in the water about 1,000 yards back. They're towing a sled, what they called a sled, and that was used for bombing practice. We would, and the other aircraft that did bombing would come in at a 90-degree angle doing bomb runs on that. When it wasn't being used, they'd just pull it in and be stored on the back end of the carrier. The next one is the one picture that nobody in the world gets to see except the naval aviator. This is what it looks like coming in for carrier landing, in this case on the Intrepid. As you can see, the two things the pilot has to do is keep that meatball lined up with those datum lights, and he has to line up in the center. So as you can see from this picture when it was taken, this was done by the photo squadron that shared our ready room. He's a little bit to the right, and he's a little high. You can see that meatball in the mirror is a little high, but he worries about being a little to the right, because although he's going in that way, keep in mind the carrier is moving that way. So by the time he gets down there, he's going to be perfectly lined up, but it's going to have moved in that direction. So this is my favorite picture of all. Okay. This cruise is put together to take midshipmen from Annapolis and all the Navy ROTCs out for their summer cruise. And they were required to go out between their sophomore and junior year, and between their junior and senior year. And on board the ship, they wore caps with a little black rim around the top, so everybody would know, okay, those are midshipmen, they're not the regular Navy yet. When we hit the ports in Europe, that wasn't very nice, but the sailors would get ashore first, and they'd say to the girls, stay away from those Navy guys that have the little black rim in the hat. They got medical problems. Okay, guys, see the next one. Oh, that, I'm talking about bombing. It's very hard to see up there. I've circled a plane doing at 90-degree angle, bombing the sled back there. The next one. Oh, here's an AD coming in for landing after being out on a rocket run. And 2 rockets still on there, but the minute his tailhook caught the wire, 2 rockets came flying off the plane, but they did not explode. They just went sliding down the deck, and if he was far enough down, he'd just go right over the edge. The photographer got a great shot there. Okay, the next one is, oh, the plane we were flying was designed as a day fighter, and we could get to 35,000 feet in a fairly reasonable time. Didn't have an afterburner back then. And the idea was that they were going to build a rocket that would be mated to our plane. But when we got up there to 35,000, for these high-flying Russian bombers, this is a medium bomber here, the Badger, we'd have enough speed left to zoom up and point at the plane. The missile was the Sidewinder. It's infrared, has a heat seeker in the nose, and you can't fire it towards the sun because that's where it'll go. But once it caught the heat of any other object like a plane, you hear a little tone in your earphone, you pickle it off. It had a speed of Mach 1.1 plus whatever speed you were flying at. You just turned around and came home. That was going to take the bomber out. The only problem is our fighter, day fighter, came and went before the Sidewinder was finally fully developed. We got to fire 2 of them in the squadron. The CO and the XO, of course, got to fire. The practice firing was at a 5-inch rocket under one wing. You fired that off first, so you heard the little tone in the air, meant the Sidewinder had picked up the heat from that 5-inch rocket, then you fire that off. And I have movie film. I missed the first one because I pulled off the side a little Kodak 8mm camera taking some pictures. You forget about gravity because all of a sudden there's no planes in my viewfinder. Of course, that 5-inch rocket starts down. They push over to stay with it, and I look out there and there's nobody, and there they are way down there. So the next time I knew to stay with them. And I got a good movie film of that Sidewinder catching up with that 5-inch rocket. So the problem with the plane was a plane that came and was out of use. They had better planes with afterburners, so we lost being day fighters. Next thing is they turned us into bombers. We were going to transition to an aircraft called an A4D that Douglas built, designed to carry a special weapon. Now that's the politically correct way to say atomic bomb. It was a tactical Mark 27. It was only about that big in diameter and wasn't much longer than some of those fuel tanks you've seen on planes. But it carried it in the center station. So the landing gear on the A4, when you see a picture of it, it's very high because the weapon is carried externally. And there were 2 methods for bombing. One, and we did our bombing off Tangier Island in the Chesapeake Bay. You would come down close as you could to the water, get up to 500 knots airspeed, get the aircraft settled down, lock the gyros, and the whole idea was if you're going into the enemy target, you don't know when to let go. Well, the thing is, you get to the target, then you start a 4G pull-up. We would top off at about 9,000 feet, but at 104 degrees, the weapon would be released. It was so aerodynamic that you just couldn't release it like it did a bomb during the Second World War. It would just stay right with the plane. So it actually had a little explosive device to push it away from the plane. The weapon would top out at 14,000 feet, and if you were accurate, just come right down and land on the target. And the engineers, those scientists, had graphs showing us that after we had turned and were on the way out, we'd just be ahead of the heat, the radiation, and the concussion. According to their slide stick rules, we'd come back alive. Thank God we didn't have to prove them. The next one is what was called loft bombing, or low angle, medium angle bombing. This was much harder because you had to judge the distance. You started to pull up way back here. When you got to 45 degrees, the weapon was released, and it just came over to the target. You again topped out, turned over, and went right back out. The idea of this going back out the same way you came in was when we got to the Med, the planning with the aircraft, they had already sent out a lot of electronic devices, and they could tell the type of radar that the Soviet bloc nations were using along the Med, where they were in charge of the country. So our mission was planned to go out, get as high an altitude as we could, and head towards the target. Once we got to a point where air intelligence said, you know, you're getting close to where they're going to pick you up on radar. At that point, we went down, and the rest of the mission was at water or treetop level to get in under the radar. So we were doing these kind of practices all the time. Next thing, this is where, I do want to tell you about one thing. Chief Warrant Officer Frank Doran came to the squadron because of his expertise in electronics when we thought we were going to be using the Sidewinder. When we got to Lisbon, our first port of call, he took me under his wing. You know, here's the little guy, about 20, 25 years of service, and here's the ensign, you know, he's going to take care of me. He said, let me show you how you go on liberty. town like Lisbon. You get off the boat on the dock, and a whole bunch starts moving one way. He said, they're moving that way, you move this way. Then the group gets a little thinner, and they're going that way, then you go this way. And pretty soon, as you may or may not know, Lisbon's on the side of the mountain. Pretty soon, we had worked our way up at the far end of the town, and we were the only ones. I found a little bistro up there where the casts were built into that wall, and the wine was 5 cents a glass. And I'd swear, it was the darkest red I've ever seen. I'd swear they were on the other side of the wall stomping. But he said, now that's the way you have some quiet liberty. In '58, back at Oceana, we had to do a hurricane evacuation, all planes that could fly. Our squadron was sent out to Campbell Air Force Base, and some of the older guys that had been around for a while sent the air intelligence officer over to the bar, O Club, and he came back with a dozen cases of beer. And we pulled the nose on our aircraft where the ammo cans were. And of course, there's no ammo in there, but he fill them all with beer cans. So by the time we got out to Campbell Air Force Base and landed, popped the nose, everybody had a nice cold beer. October of '58 is when the mission changed to special weapons. We went to a special weapons delivery school over in Norfolk. One of the interesting things, this is how to do your planning and fuse setting for the weapon, stuff like that. And the one thing I learned there was what the secret was that the Rosenbergs had given to Russia regarding our atomic bomb. As you know, the atomic bomb works by implosion. It has a casing around it that comes in, compressing it, that's a bad word, compressing it. And the whole trick is to have that uniform, have it all the same. Well, whatever our scientists had developed, that was what the Rosenbergs had passed on to Russia. Oh, this is November of '58 when I shot myself down. What you're looking at, on this one, it was on Fridays, and we have what's called a group grope on Friday. The whole squadron, every plane that can fly, heads out to the western part of Virginia where there's a lot of dams up in those mountains. And we just do practice bomb runs, and those we call a group grope. I'm in this last 2 plane formation to take off, 5 line march with section leader. And in this case, we get out on the runway. I'm here, he's here. He runs up, we both gives me a nod, we run up to 100%. He pulls back 2%. His engine's at 98%. So that gives me, as we're moving, a little play to stay with. He nods, we start down the runway in a formation takeoff. Now, my eyes are only on him and his plane, nothing else. He gives a nod, we're up. He gives the first nod of his head, which was for us to bring our gear up. But I notice my plane is getting lower. And by this time, he's moving away. And I'm watching, can't take my eyes off him. I got the stick back, it's all the way back. I'm afraid I'm going to stall, so I pop it forward. Check the airspeed, I've got 150 knots, takes off at 128. I've got plenty of flying speed, but it's going down. Nothing I do is going to bring it back up. And that was a dual runway down there. The plane had drifted over, so when I finally hit down, it was in the grass just beyond the 2 dual runways, and I'm tearing off down through the field. Way over in the corner, I think you can see a structure. Well, that's the house that the captain of the air station gets. And it's right at the corner of the Navy base. I'm headed towards it. It's getting bigger and bigger in my wings. Here I am plowing through the field, and I'm thinking, this thing's got to slow down. Then I realized I'm still at 100% power. That jet engine's just tooling right now. So I shut it down. And the last, just before it came to a rest, you can't see it, but there's a ditch here. And went down to the ditch, and as we came up, the wingtip caught the edge of the ditch. And now see the next picture? It turned me around, but broke the wing. So the aircraft was astride. And of course, now there's fuel all over the place. Well, I shut down all the switches, and I'm out, headed for a fence over alongside the field way over there. And we were still, in that aircraft, still using the type of parachute you see from the Second World War. All the straps here and the parachutes back here. And when you're walking, it's just helping you walk by hitting them. Guy in the tower later told me I was moving so fast that parachute was straight out behind me, never hit me at all. I'm sitting over at the side while the fire trucks pull up, having my lucky strike waiting for me. What the board determined was that as I was coming back on the stick, the webbing of my glove, you always wore gloves for fire protection. They're very thin, but for fire protection. And as I was coming back, the trim tab for the jet's right there. Up, forward, and back for nose trim, side to side for wing trim. They concluded that as I came back on the stick, the webbing there was pushing the trim tab full nose down. And in that aircraft, the whole wing section back there operates when you're taking off, not just the rudder. And they said once I popped it over to get air, see what my airspeed was, they said I was coming down, nothing's going to stop it. All of this took about, 10 seconds, 10 or 15 seconds between we start to roll and I'm out there at the other end of the runway. So if we hadn't caught, if I hadn't caught that edge of that ditch and broke the wing, they would have had that plane up and flying in a couple of days.
No objection.
Oh yeah, it had an ejection seat, but you're not going. It didn't have a vapor seat. You needed 800 to 900 feet altitude before you want to punch out, and that happened so fast that I never even thought of it. What's the next? Oh, this aircraft's the A4D. Now this is a much later model that the Marines used. It's all kinds of electronics on it. Ours was the A4D2. This is where you carry the special weapon. We did rockets and you do regular bombs. This happens to be a gas tank. The special weapon that we carried, Mark 27, I said, was not even half the diameter of that gas tank. Very good tactical weapon. In late July, we went down to on the Forest Hall to do night and day ops off Leeward Point in Cuba. When we were down there a couple of years before that, Castro and his band of outlaws were just in the hills, the rebels. But when we went down this time, they were getting very brazen. They were coming over the fence at night, going through the BOQ, which pretty much opened, doors, windows that didn't exist. Everything was just open as far as the rooms went. They were trying to steal pistols. We carried a Smith & Wesson 6-shot with tracer bullets in for emergencies, like when we went down at sea and you could see a ship or hear a ship, they couldn't see you. You could fire a tracer and they could see it, almost like a very small flare. The story goes, one guy bailed out and he was so afraid to be picked up or not. He had fired all 6 of his before he even hit the water. But Castro's men were coming over the fence in the back of the barracks, coming in their way. We were sound asleep to see if they could find any weapons to steal, so we always had to leave our gun on the carrier when we were on land. Next thing, I'll jump to this. When we went down to Jacksonville, Florida to transition to the A4, the executive officer, myself and 3 others went down at one time. Dick Rumble's his name, and while we were down there, he gave me this instrument card that's one of my favorites. About as time goes by, you become more familiar with the mechanics of paper shuffling and less familiar with the mechanics of flying. So you hold the card up to the sky, and if the color of the sky matches the color of card, you go file a flight plan. It means if the weather's not good, you don't go out. And the next one is 2 things here. This aircraft that's in flight refueling is really close up, and he's plugged into that basket I showed you in the other one for fueling. I use this picture to draw in a little box there. They developed this device for carrier landings. The pilot is looking out that way towards the mirror system as he's coming in for landing. So that's mounted right in his eyesight. Depending on his speed and his weight, if he is too fast, too high on his angle of attack, the top light would be on, pointing down, meaning get your nose down. If he was too low, the bottom light's on, saying come up a little bit. And if he was right on for weight and speed and everything, little circle, in the center would be lit. So that, you didn't have to be looking at your gauges, you're looking out there. It's like a heads-up display today in the modern aircraft, but this was a device right there. The next picture is, when we were in the Med, they came out with the, I'll call it a mechanical DR navigation computer, early stage. You could set in the latitude and longitude of the carrier. They'd give you that information just before you took off. You already knew the latitude and longitude of your target. You would put that in the machine. And they give you the expected latitude and longitude of where they would be when you came back. Then you take off, you select target, and so it's giving you information, direction, and distance to the target. And then when you were finished at the target, switch back to carrier, and it would tell you the direction to fly back to the carrier. But the one thing it didn't compensate for was wind. So if you had a bad wind one way or the other, you're not going to know if you're on or not. It's mechanical. It's going to say, hey, you're here. Well, you look out of the cockpit, and there's no carrier when you got back. What they had was what's called a square search. We're here at the point where the carrier should be. So we pick an angle, let's say north. We fly for 1 minute, fly 2 minutes west, fly 4 minutes south, 6 minutes east, and keep expanding that until we sighted the carrier. You hope you sighted the carrier before you ran out of fuel. Keep in mind, during wartime, their TACAN and other navigational aids would be turned off. You're not going to have any beacon to hone in on to get back to the carrier. We're back in September or October of late '59. We're back in the Virginian area doing high altitude raids on carriers. In October, we were at sea for day carrier ops, and the procedure of the squadron would be is 5 pilots would suit up for the flight. 4 were going to go on it. The 5th was a standby. He would go up, he would participate in the briefing in the ready room. He'd go up, he'd get in a plane, get all fired up, and he would just sit there. If one of the 4 in the group is supposed to go off, the aircraft's down for any reason, then bang, you're in the group. And I was, for the first flight of the day, I was that 5th pilot. And back out, when you're out at sea and the water temperature's below 50 degrees, you wear what's called a poopy suit. It's a rubber suit that literally, except for your hands and your head, will give you about an hour's survival time in the cold water. So I'm back down in the ready room. I had just unzipped it, not taken the thing off because it's hectic to get in and out of it. And we get a call. They want to know if anybody's available. One of the demons, the aircraft, that had just taken off, he couldn't get his gear up. So he had to stay at a slower airspeed so it didn't damage the gear or tear off the landing, the doors for the landing gear. And of course, he didn't have enough fuel at that altitude and that airspeed to last the hour and a half to the next cycle when they'd be landing planes. So they wanted to know if anybody could get up there with the tanker, and the duty officer said, yes, we got a pilot. 2 of my other squadron mates went up. They pre-flighted the aircraft. When I got up there, it was on the catapult. I hadn't hooked it up yet, but it's on the catapult. The guys say, everything's okay. I'm in there. I get strapped in. I can feel the bridle pulling it up tight. I'm looking down, and the landing signal officer's going like this, and I'm going like that, and bang, I'm on. Just at the time he's coming alongside. So I'm out there, I stream out the hose to give him some gas. And we go around 4 or 5 times and he can't get plugged in. And I can imagine he's a little nervous. and then they're going to tell him to go up to altitude and punch out, pick him up in the sea. And I said, wait a minute, he's having trouble because the thing is bouncing around back there. I said, let him try it when I'm in a turn. When I start to bank, that hose falls down and away from the airstream of the aircraft, kind of in the center of when you're going around. So I did a very slow turn, and he had no trouble plugging in. I gave him fuel, and they said, okay, Clancy, you now have 1 hour. You can go out there 2 miles from the ship at 500 feet, put out your speed brakes, and go to 100% and burn off your fuel. That we had no way to dump fuel in those planes, so that you're down to weight when we're ready to take everybody back on board. And I thought, hey, great, the carrier has a daily newspaper, and the next morning I'm looking at it about this incident, and they give credit to the other squadron instead of the one I was in. So the first shall be last, or something like that. What's the next thing we've got here? Oh, on the med cruise, in addition to the aircraft we were flying, and a couple of those AEDs before, there was a Crusader squadron. That's a day fighter with an afterburner, and the Skywarrior, the A3D. This is the largest aircraft for landing and taking off on a carrier, and the wings fold for saving. It's a 3-man crew and could carry 12,000 pounds of bombs or a couple of nuclear weapons. Before we got into med, I told you we had to plan our targets. I see the next one. I think it should be the map, yeah. Our first port of call was Con, and our range was, without refueling, was about 750 miles. So any of these countries, and this one, I have the next slide, yeah. All those arcs you see from Beirut, Athens, is our range of 750 miles, and the Russian bloc countries had a lot of airfields in those areas. So one of our targets, my target, was in one of those areas. So there's no problem any place in the Med for us to get in. We would be a second or third strike. Air Force B-52s would be first if the ball went up. We were in Cannes, France, Naples, Italy, Athens, Greece, Beirut, Lebanon, Istanbul, Turkey. Oh yeah, this next photograph is not to show you what a good-looking pilot, or the fact he's got 3 excellent E's for over-the-shoulder bombing, rockets, and loft bombing, but to show you on the strut here, and you can see how high off the ground this is. The lights that the pilot was looking at in that little indicator are reflected here. So the landing signal officer is seeing the same light arrangement as you're coming in that you're seeing up in the cockpit. He knows for your airspeed and your weight whether you're high, low, or right on. And the last photograph, I think, oh no. When I got off active duty in April, May of 1960, I went back to college, finished my last year, went to law school, and then came up to the Philadelphia area where I went to work for some small law firms. In February of '66, I joined the reserves up at Willow Grove, but there were no jet squadrons there at that time. The Cuban Missile Crisis in '63 had used up all the active duty squadrons, and the reserve squadrons that were at Willow Grove, the jets, were sent down to Florida to fill in down there. So I joined a transport squadron in an administrative position, because when they went on their 2 weeks of active duty, reserves, you drill 1 week in a month, and then 2 weeks sometime during the year, you're gone for two weeks of active duty. They could carry the whole squadron with them. And for the first 4 years, that was great. I got to Rhodes, Spain twice, and I got to Barbers Point, Hawaii twice. And then, of course, as in the Navy, it always happens, they got tight on money. So after that, when they went on their 2 weeks, it was just the plane crew, not the rest of the squadron. And the last photograph, in In 2005, got a call from one of my old squadron mates. They were putting together a 50th anniversary down at Oceana for the squadron. That originally was flying the Panther and the Cougar, and they're now flying the Hornet, the F-18, to come down there for the weekend. And it was amazing how many from my original group in 1958 were able to make it. In that group, Rumble I talked about before, he was 2-star admiral when he retired. One of the other guys was a 1-star admiral, and more than half of them had made captain in the Navy before they retired. So in 05, we had a great reunion. But we told these young whippersnappers up here, don't laugh at us too much in 50 years, this is what you know in the client. If I have a minute, one of my daughters found this on the internet and sent it to me. It's addressed to all the kids who survived the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. At first, we survived being born to a mother who smoked or drank while they carried us. They took aspirin, ate blue cheese dressing, tuna from a can, and didn't get tested for diabetes. Then after that trauma, our baby cribs were covered with a bright-colored lead-based paint. We had no childproof lids on medicine bottles, doors, or cabinets. And we rode our bikes. We had no helmets, not to mention the risk we took hitchhiking. As children, we'd ride in cars with no seat belts or airbags. Riding in the back of a pickup truck on a warm day was a special treat. We drank water from a garden hose and not from a bottle. We shared one soft drink with 4 friends from one bottle, and no one actually died from this. We ate cupcakes, white bread, real butter, drank soda pop with sugar in it, and we weren't overweight because we were outside playing. We would leave home in the morning and play all day as long as we were back when the street lights came on. No one was able to reach us all day, and we were okay. We'd spend hours building go-karts out of scrap and then ride them down the hill only to find out we forgot the brakes. After running into the bushes a few times, we learned to solve that problem. We did not have PlayStation, Nintendo, Xbox, no video games at all, no 99 channels on cable, no videotapes, no surround sound, no cell phones, no personal computers, no internet or internet chat rooms. We had friends, and we went outside and found them. We fell out of trees, got cut, broke bones and teeth, but there were no lawsuits from these accidents. We were given BB guns for our 10th birthday. We made up games with sticks and tennis balls, and although we were told it would happen, we did not put out very many eyes. When we went to a friend's house, we didn't have to call first. We just showed up, rang the bell, or just walked in and talked to them. Little League had tryouts, and not everyone made the team. Those who didn't had to learn to deal with disappointment. Imagine that. The idea of a parent bailing us out if we broke the law was unheard of. They actually sided with the law. This generation has produced some of the best risk takers, problem solvers, and inventors ever. The past 50 years has been an explosion of innovation and new ideas. We had freedom, failure, success, and responsibility, and we learned how to deal with it all. And you're one of them. Congratulations. You might want to share this with others who had the luck to grow up as kids before the lawyers and government regulations our lives took over. And while you're at it, pass on to your kids so they know how brave their parents were. Kind of makes you want to run through the house holding scissors, doesn't it? Thank you very much. If there's time, I'll take any questions.
That was excellent.
Thank you.
Partly because I was in an A4 squadron. I was a plane captain on the Coral Sea. And you answered my question about, we always heard that the A4 Skyhawk sat higher for the nuclear weapon.
Yeah, that's...
But we never were confirmed. Did you fly the A4?
Yeah.
How did you like that compared to, I always thought it was like a sports car.
Yeah, it was nice. Keep in mind, it didn't have an afterburner, but the bombing run at treetop level or just above the water, I mean, that's a thrill. 500 knots, I mean, you better make it or you're going to be a lot of pieces. It was great. It was great.
Did you ever fire a bullpup?
No, I don't think that was around in the late 50s.
I was in from 63 to 65.
Okay, I was out in April of 60. I don't ever even remember hearing that term back then. The one thing you mentioned reminded me, well, there goes that flight. Next question.
One thing I'll tell you, I have a picture of an A4 skipping the water, doing a sled run, coming in, firing the guns, and then his tail skipping the water. Now, that sounds like, I actually have a photograph of that, if you can believe that.
Oh, I've seen.
He got in big trouble.
I can imagine. You were talking about the A4 and the weapons. When we were in the Med, no port in Europe is big enough to bring a carrier, American carrier in and dock it. So we always docked down, drop the anchor, just the bow anchor, and of course then the carrier would swing on that anchor chain, so it was always pointing into the wind. And when we were in the waters over there, each of the 2 A4D squadrons had a ready plane sitting in the hangar with the weapon on board and a pilot fully suited except for his helmet sitting in it. All they had to do was take him up on the flight deck, and the steam catapults we used were strong enough in port he could be launched while the carrier is just swinging on the chain. So the CO and the XO usually set that priority and that duty when we were in port. They took turns. So they always had 4 aircraft that could be launched in probably a half-hour notice of the problem, any problem.
Any other questions?
Not during my time, no. That last of the torpedo planes I've ever heard of was during the Second World War. By the way, why I'm so happy about this, during my time of active duty, from 55 to 60, what I call peacetime Navy, there was not one hot spot any place in the world except in the summer of 58 when we were on that North Atlantic cruise. There was something broke in Lebanon, and the Marines went ashore, but they were in there less than a week, and then they pulled out. I never looked up to see what that incident was. But can you imagine going 5.5 years with not something going on, some hot spot in the world? So what I call peacetime Navy. We got to drop the bombs and shoot the guns. Nobody was flying back at me. But I could still crash a plane. No. You raise an interesting point. I was able, I've been putting together a book of all this for my kids and grandkids, and you can get copies of your Navy records, which included fitness reports. I have to go back and look and see how it was written up after that accident. But no, they have that old thing about, you fell out of the bike, get back on the bike the next day. After they grounded me for 24 hours, med people, flight surgeons cleared me, and within 2 days I was back flying again. But I can tell you, everybody watched their glove hand when they were taking off.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much, Bob.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was good. Hey, buddy.
And please don't forget the donation jar on the way out. Anyone interested in volunteering, please.